I want to start today with something that sounds simple, but honestly, it explains a lot. Most of us don't live in dangerous environments anymore, but our brains act like we do. We live in a world of constant evaluation, constant comparison, constant updates, constant performance. And the nervous system doesn't really care what the threat is, it cares whether it can predict what's coming next. That's the key word here today: prediction. This episode is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. Learn how artificial stimulation miswires your brain and what you can do to rewire it back to purpose, intimacy, and connection. Go to drtrishleigh.com/book. Welcome back to the podcast with me, Dr. Trish Leigh, your hostess with the mostest. Today, I have a doozy for you, so let's settle in. Okay, let me start off by reminding you that although we wish our brain's job was to guarantee our happiness, it's not. Its job actually is prediction and survival. When the brain can predict, it relaxes. When it can't, it stays alert. And that single fact explains a lot about why desire, intimacy, and connection feel harder than they should in today's day and age. There's a biological mechanism underneath this. It's called air in the brain, the arousal inhibition response. Air essentially is the brain's braking system. When the nervous system detects unpredictability, pressure, or even a subtle threat, it suppresses sexual response. It does this automatically without your permission, not because desire is gone per se, but because safety feels uncertain. The brain will always prioritize survival over reproduction. Always. Now, there's a reason that desire collapses under pressure. Modern culture trains us to live in anticipation instead of in presence. Scroll culture, swipe culture, metrics culture, performance culture. Dopamine isn't about pleasure, it is about the anticipation of pleasure. It's about what might happen next. So when your brain is constantly trained to anticipate, to wait, to scan, to monitor, it becomes very good at vigilance and very bad at settling in. This is why people say things like, I feel desire, but my body doesn't cooperate. I want connection, but I tense up. The moment there's pressure, everything shuts down. That's not psychological weakness. Hear me on this. That is a nervous system that is stuck in high alert mode. Andrew Huberman talks about this from a neuroscience perspective. Uncertainty destabilizes the nervous system more than bad news. When the brain doesn't know what to expect, it stays on guard. And a guarded system doesn't open easily, sexually, emotionally, or relationally. This is where erectile dysfunction and SAD, sexual arousal dysfunction, often show up. Not as performance problems per se, as air in the brain in action. In men, air can interrupt erection or prevent blood flow from sustaining one. In women, it can inhibit lubrication, swelling, or physiological readiness. Desire may still exist mentally, but the signal is being overridden by vigilance. The gap between wanting and responding is neurological. It's not moral, it's not personal, it's not a failure of attraction. Here's something important to consider: desire doesn't usually disappear, it narrows, it becomes conditional, situational. dependent on very specific states. That's why someone can feel desire in fantasy or alone or in controlled settings, especially those with very high stimulation, but not in real connection. Because real connection requires different things. It requires presence, unpredictability, emotional exposure. And exposure is the opposite of what a vigilant nervous system wants. So the body does something very intelligent. It inhibits response, not because desire is gone, but because safety is unclear. When safety feels unclear, air in the brain activates. It's subtle at first, a little monitoring, a little tension, a little hesitation. But over time, if vigilance becomes familiar, air in the brain fires up quickly. The nervous system learns to suppress before it allows, and suppression becomes automatic. Mel Robbins says something that sounds pretty simple, but is actually very neuroscientific. Clarity is kindness. Because ambiguity keeps the nervous system in stress. When signals don't line up, when reality feels inconsistent, the brain doesn't debate whether it should feel safe. It just stays alert. That's true in work. That's true in dating. That's true in intimacy. Now, this is where betrayal becomes a very important example. I have a lot of couples that listen to this podcast together, so I want to touch upon this. Betrayal matters neurologically because it collapses prediction suddenly. The brain had a model. This person, this relationship is safe. This is what connection looks like. This is what to expect. And then reality contradicts it all. From the brain's perspective, that's not just emotional pain. That's a threat event. When betrayal collapses prediction, air in the brain activates, and it activates hard. It activates suddenly. The brain flags intimacy as unpredictable. The body learns to hesitate. That hesitation is not unforgiveness. It's recalibration on a neurological level. Reassurance doesn't deactivate air in the brain. Repeated, consistent safety does. Now, let's make a very important distinction. If someone is physically unsafe, being harmed, controlled, or threatened, their nervous system should stay alert. That's when it's very important to. In that case, regulation isn't just the priority, safety is. But for many people, the danger is no longer happening. Behavior has changed. Accountability exists, and the body still reacts. That's perceived safety versus real safety. Stored threat doesn't resolve through explanation, it resolves through repeated evidence. That's why I always say believe behaviors. Okay, so let's look at the bigger pattern. Betrayal is one way prediction collapses quickly. Modern life does the same thing more quietly. When the nervous system lives in evaluation, when it lives in comparison, performance, anticipation, air in the brain stays slightly activated. Not at an emergency level type of activation, but humming in the background. And you know what happens. Over time, the nervous system forgets what relaxed anticipation feels like. You can check this out on my weekly briefing on YouTube with the slideshow. The slideshow shows this in the brain. Relaxed anticipation is where healthy arousal lives. This is where erectile dysfunction and sexual arousal dysfunction, SAD, in the brain show up clearly, not as performance failures, but as brain state signals. On brain maps, what I often see is this: significantly elevated high beta activity. High beta is the fast, hot frequency of vigilance, monitoring, and threat prediction. When high beta dominates, the nervous system shifts into sympathetic dominance. In sympathetic dominance, sexual response is inhibited. The brain may still generate desire, but air in the brain overrides the cascade. Instead of flowing into the body, arousal gets rerouted back into the control circuits. That's why someone can say this: I want to be here. I am attracted. I do care, and still struggle with arousal response. This is the brain choosing safety over reproduction, not because reproduction is unwanted, but because safety isn't fully predicted. This pattern doesn't only affect sexual response, it affects motivation and it affects how you perceive rewards broadly. Large neuroimaging meta analyses show reduced striatal activation during reward anticipation across addictive and overstimulated patterns. That doesn't mean desire is gone. It means that the threshold has shifted. When real world reward feels less intense than high novelty stimulation, the brain conserves energy. What looks and probably feels like shutdown is actually neurological efficiency. But hear me when I say this: arousal doesn't vanish, it becomes inaccessible. When the brain stays on high alert, the circuit that allows sexual response to move into the body gets interrupted. Desire still exists, but it cannot translate without safety. Desire needs safety to move to and through the body. Sexual response follows brain state. Now, through the wonders of neuroplasticity, here's the hopeful part: the nervous system is plastic. The same pathways that have been shaped by overstimulation, pressure, betrayal, and vigilance, they can be reshaped. The miswired can be rewired, not through effort, not through performance, not through forcing response, but through consistency, predictability, low pressure, presence. In a supernormal, fully human state, air is recalibrated. It activates when there is a real threat. It stays quiet when safety is present. Modern culture trains it to fire way too often, way too hard. Regulation trains it to settle. When regulation becomes familiar, desire feels grounded instead of fragile. Intimacy stops feeling performative. The body stops monitoring, and instead, nothing is being forced. And this, my friend, is why it works. Neuroregulation through my Regulate First program accelerates the process. It shows the brain in real time when it's in vigilance and when it shifts into regulation. Instead of forcing change, the brain learns to reduce the threat signal on its own. High alert patterns can settle. Monitoring gives way to stability. When regulation in the brain stabilizes, air in the brain quiets. And when air quiets, arousal doesn't need to be pushed. It returns naturally on its own. Modern life, with screens and especially explicit matter, trains vigilance. Betrayal collapses prediction, and air activates exactly as it was designed to do. Erectile dysfunction and sexual arousal dysfunction are often not failures, they are signals for you to listen to. And healing doesn't begin with trust, it begins with regulation. When the brain can predict safety again, desire and connection return, not because you forced them, but because the nervous system allowed them. That's not self help. That, my friend, is neuroprotection. biology. If what I described here today feels all too familiar, the hesitation, the inconsistency, the gap between desire and response, I want you to know that guessing won't fix it. Because this is not about trying harder. This is about your brain state. A brain map shows us, me and you together, exactly what your nervous system is doing. Is it strained? Is it stuck in a high alert mode with elevated levels of vigilance? Is it drained, under responsive, in reward circuitry unless there's very high stimulation? Or it can even be oscillating back and forth between the both. I don't speculate. Instead, we measure. When you can see your brain patterns clearly, recovery becomes precise instead of frustrating. Erectile dysfunction and SAD, sexual arousal dysfunction, are not identity based. They are signals from your brain and your nervous system. Signals can be listened to and then they can be regulated. If you're ready to understand what your brain is actually doing, not what you fear it's doing, you can learn more about brain mapping and you can book your brain map session with me so you can learn about regulation-based recovery at drtrishleigh.com, because I want you to know clarity changes everything. Okay, my friend, until next time, I want you to remember, control your brain or it will control you. I'll see you then.